We're back. You're listening to KTAL LP FM, Las Cruces, New Mexico, 101.5 on your dial, or streamed live at Radio KTAL, QUETAL.org. This is a segment called Science Let's Take a Look. I'm your host, Vince Gucic. Every Tuesday, noon to 1. We have a guest on the phone from Chico, California, Professor Jim Pushnik at Cal State Chico in his amazing program on sustainability. I should also recognize John Nelson, our friend here in the studio, helping us to figure out which buttons to push when we take a call. It's a complicated console. Right, John? Okay. So, Jim, keep going.
Okay. Well, I was speaking about our Resilient Cities initiative, which is an outgrowth of a program that came out of the University of Oregon. It's called their Sustainable Cities Initiative. About 7 years ago, I went to a workshop that they held in Eugene, and was very impressed with their idea. And we've morphed it into what I just described. It was a interesting story how this came about. After attending that workshop in Oregon, I contacted the Region 9 Director of Sustainability for the U.S. EPA in San Francisco and asked her to set up a workshop for the Cal State system. Unfortunately, not a lot of my colleagues from the other 22 campuses attended, but what I did was I went and I invited the mayor and members of the city council and different officers from our city, along with myself and a couple of the other faculty, to attend this workshop. And it was a really productive process. In that, what we ended up doing was we ended up talking to the city about things on their work plan that they did not have the workforce to complete. So things that are lower down in priority, and that was one of these South Campus projects. And so it has been a very productive public-public partnership in terms of they're getting the work done. They do compensate us. One of the ways that I've made this program really viable with both faculty and students, each class that participated, I was able to give them some funds for class materials. You know, whether every one of them produces a poster, every class, and I hired a student assistant for each of the faculty members and a student writer. And so the student assistants would coordinate what the output of the class was. Like the GIS students were looking at the mapping, the heat maps. And then at the end of the semester, I hired a student writer to compile all their ideas, and we tried not to discourage some of these ideas. Some of them were, out of the box kind of ideas, but I wanted a full scope of what the students thought about this. Some of the things, like, let me just give you an example of one that I thought was a little bit wild, was that they wanted to make solar streets. They wanted the paving to have some sort of solar capacity. And then it was interesting because then the natural scientists who had just mapped the urban forest described, that there will be no irradiation on those streets even if you did so. So it was, that's the kind of cross-disciplinary conversations I wanted to have the students complete, right? So you sometimes live in that, we used to call them silos in academia. Now we call them cylinders of excellence. And so,
I never heard that kind of a euphemism before. If I want to break in, a lot of the stuff sounds pretty visual, like the GIS heat mapping. Is any of that on the web?
The entire thing is on the web.
Really? What's the URL, or probably a whole series of URLs?
No, actually, this one we have, and everything is compiled there. It's South Campus Neighborhood, Chico.
Yeah.
and that should pull it up.
And that's .org or
.org.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, so you can see all of the reports that have been compiled by the students, and that is what is being presented to the city council as their deliverable.
Great. I remember when we talked yesterday in preparation for this, you had mentioned how this might change students' worldview or their actions, and those turned out to be two different things, right?
They did. I went into this with the thought that knowledge converts into behavioral change. In other words, I'm a believer that humans are rational creatures, and that as you learn something, you integrate that into your behaviors. It did convert, translate while students were still in matriculation at the university, but as they left the university, it did not hold. The other thing, it didn't really, the thing that we talked about yesterday that was really surprising to me was that the worldviews that students come a priori to the university with are very hard to change, in that even if they gain new knowledge and they do change their behaviors, and we assess that with an environmental scenario that has, I used the Sacramento Bay Delta area as our one last year, and it, depending on where the student's home was, determined how they viewed that particular issue of the San Francisco Bay Delta. And whether if you're from the Central Valley, it really was, well, wait a minute, water is more important than fish, and we need the water to grow our agricultural crops. If you're from the coastal area or from the reasons in the Sacramento Bay, they were more interested in the salinization of the estuary, so that, it was very different. And those didn't change based on the evidence that they had gotten from these courses. Their understanding does. Very clear increase in knowledge, but not a direct translation into a modification of their worldviews.
Interesting.
We're still it's quite puzzling, honestly.
So go back to what you said about behavioral changes. You said they did not carry after they left.
Well, I probably overstated that. What happened was that they find themselves in a world where, they go into a business practice, and we've talked about energy conservation, technological advancements, those kinds of things that reduce our environmental impacts and social impacts as well. And what they found is when they got into the quote real world, that those things were not valued. It was largely based on economic principles. And so, and I got this from my survey of alumni, and this is a limited survey. I sent it out to 500 graduates.
Was this a mail or email survey?
It was an email.
Okay.
And I got a pretty good return. I got about 150 back out of that.
That's good.
And to be honest, they all said it was very valuable, but that in reality, in their jobs, in their personal lives, when they moved into suburbia, they become a little more successful. That things didn't hold as well as we'd hoped they would. So
I don't know how you could go further there, but maybe that's a challenge for the next round.
Well, it certainly is, and I think what I'm finding now is that it is these co-curricular activities like the resilient cities that I was just talking about that will make the difference. Because prior, when I did that survey, I hadn't done this particular program. I think that that there is a connection in education between knowledge and a practicum. I think that this kind of approach where we have them take the classroom learning and apply it in a real world setting will make a difference. Because for one thing, these students have now seen that they can have an impact. The city has already responded with new bike lanes, with new lighting, LED lighting in the streets, driven by solar panels. They are cleaning up the infrastructure, the broken sidewalks. The students have seen that they can have a difference.
So this is actually one thing that's happening right now. So you don't have the data on what these students will see or retain after they leave.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
That'll be very interesting.
It will, and we're in the process of surveying that. We'll continue to do that for some time.
Oh, speaking of impacts, business impacts, one of the most shocking things that I have now heard in several venues is Bitcoin mining. It uses such a huge fraction of the energy. It uses as much energy worldwide as the Czech Republic, and one Bitcoin transaction uses as much energy and computer use as 300,000 Visa transactions.
Wow!
It will run 19 homes for a day.
That's just.
How is that sustainable?
It's not.
It's not. Yeah.
It's not. Let me shift gears on you and talk about another program that I'm running here.
Okay, hold on.
Sort of long.
Let's do that in a nice block.
Okay.
We're running. This thing is going so well. We use up a lot of time, so we're going to take another little station break. You're listening to KTAL LP FM in Las Cruces, New Mexico. I'm your host, Vince Gucic. We've been talking with Jim Pushnik, professor at Cal State Chico, and we'll be right back to him after a couple of minutes.